Now, one of the areas where we are rebuilding the anti-war movement, where our activity is growing and campaigning is developing, is of course in the colleges up and down the country. So it's a particular pleasure to ask to speak to you now from Students Stop the War, Shadia Edwards-Dashti. Please give her a hand.
Privilege for me to have the opportunity as a student to speak and reflect on the issues of this morning's panel. And indeed, it is a privilege for me to be on the panel with those, some of whom have devoted their life's work to the subjects upon which they speak. I have neither their breadth of knowledge nor their life's experience, but I do know one thing, and that is this. For a resistance movement, for an analytical movement, and for a counter movement to survive, its survival depends on young people to carry the movement forward into the future, and I want to be a part of this. And being a part of all of this is a great honour. I will speak in respect to the student body. What students are doing today is very significant. We are becoming a voice to be reckoned with, a voice that must be heard, and a voice which governments across the world must engage with and listen to. We are the voices of the revolution. If any government, including our own, thinks that students' voices can be ignored or silenced, gagged or distorted, then look at what is happening around the world. From Tunisia to Egypt to Bahrain to Red Lion Square. It is students who have taken a lead. Students have taken a lead in the anti-war movement, in troops out of Afghanistan. Students have taken a lead and stopped the war against the war in Iraq, infamously called Operation Iraqi Freedom by George Bush, in an attempt to con the world and the American people and American allies into supporting it. It is the worldwide student movement that has taken an active part in struggles against the bombing and murder of civilian population of Gaza. Who was it who opposed the arm of state in China's Tiananmen Square, or resisted the Shah of Iran before the Iranian Revolution, or in the May 1968 uprisings in France, who shook up old society? Or in Cairo in February 2011, who toppled Mubarak's one of the biggest dictatorships who ruled for 30 years with the support of the West and of America. It was the students, the kids in the square. Democracy, anti-war battle, the struggle of a free and truly inclusive world depends on students. Resistance to repressive states and the courage to challenge the status quo depends on the student body that asks questions. Frantz Fanon, the great anti-colonial critic, the freedom fighter and fighter of Algeria for independence from the French in the 1950s, has these words etched on his gravestone. Let me always be a man that asks questions. But there is no questioning without an education which encourages students to engage with ideas. So in Britain, higher education is being cut and being priced out of the market. So ideas are being cut. Critical thinking is being cut, and cut again. Why can't the government fund higher education? Because money that should be spent on higher education has been stolen to fund ideas, not to fund ideas, but to fund war. And there is plenty of money for war. That is not being taxed or paid back after a loan for 10 years or more, with a 7% interest. Kids, along with millions of students in this country, are being asked to pay the cost of this war in Afghanistan by having to pay for our tuition. When students sign a cheque for tuition fees, when we take on a loan for life, we have been robbed. We want to fund peace, not war. It is up to us to demand a real education, an education of critique, of interrogating knowledge about the world around us, so that the next generation will challenge the government and stand fast to principles of freedom and equality and play a part in student politics and student anti-war activism. It is the task of student activism to challenge the prevailing status quo, to challenge a status quo which has demonized particular communities on the grounds of color, of race, of ethnicity, and now people are being demonized because of their faith, and women are being criticized because of what they wish to wear. Now, as far as the war on terror, I will say this. 9/11 was a terrible mass murder on innocent civilians. No one doubts that it was an appalling mass murder. But 9/11 unleashed a response which did not seek to understand what had prompted this attack, nor did it seek to analyse the causes of this attack. Instead, crude and juvenile simplistic analysis blamed the attacks on fanaticism, and as a result unleashed a most ferocious response, using the law to abuse very principles on which the law was founded, by creating law, and more law, and more law, which I call outlaw, to crush communities whose only crime was a belief in Islam. Of course, acts of terrorism, which involve violence, are to be condemned, and so too must we condemn the acts of state violence, that is, acts of state terrorism by governments who wage war on other countries. There is also a benign state terrorism, and that is state terrorism which undermines civil liberty and individual freedom. And in this, within the last decade, there have been a series of laws enacted which have declared that their sole aim is to combat terrorism. Bad laws are the worst sorts of tyranny, Edmund Burke in the 18th century Anglo-Irishman statesman said. What are these laws? These laws allow police to detain in custody a person suspected of involvement in terrorism or for longer than a non-terrorist suspect. These laws allow persons suspected of involvement to be placed under virtual house arrest under what is called control orders that now name TPIMs, Terrorism Prevention and Investigation Measures, TPIMs, but not the summer refreshing alcoholic beverage with mint and fruit and cucumber. Oh no, not PIMs. The student movement here in Britain has come face to face with the state terrorism through police and repressive undemocratic tactics. We have been subject to containment. They have kettled us like cattle, but we challenge their belief in their right to do so. Kettling is not lawful. It is a false imprisonment. It is a breach of Article 5 of the European Convention of Human Rights, because it deprives us of our liberty and of our freedom. Even the court has held that such tactics can only be justified to prevent serious public disorder. Then there are these laws which criminalise the foreign nationals who are protesting against regimes in Bahrain, Libya, Tunisia, Yemen. They are protesting in Bahrain, for example, against the demolition of 47 mosques, the imprisonment of doctors who treated the wounded. Such protesters are members of the opposition. But since David Cameron saw fit to dine and entertain Bahrain's crown prince, while the Bahrain opposition find themselves criminalised in this country under prescription order, because that is what the war on terror, the legal war on terror, had done. Make criminals out of those who join groups that fight for democracy in foreign countries. W.B. Yeats, a British poet, wrote this: "What if the church and the state are the mob that howls at the door? Wine shall run thick to the end, bread tastes sour." The state is the mob that howls at the door, but Archbishop Rowan Williams is certainly not one of the mob. In the New Statesman this week, he has criticised the government on education and health cuts. He says that the anxiety and anger have to do with the feeling that not enough has been exposed to proper public argument. Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that sound familiar? What proper public argument was had about Afghanistan? And so the mob howls and more laws are passed targeting particular communities, policing particular communities, labelling communities, and in stereotyping communities that the government inflames racism and racial and religious hatred. In this, we must continue to challenge the lies and arrogance of the West and the US. We, the children of the revolutions, the voices of the revolutions, must resist and we must challenge. 10 years on, the withdrawal debate has now intensified after May 2nd's demise of bin Laden, giving it a new momentum. And the British government is the mob that howls at the door. And together we must join hands, join hearts, join minds to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan and to expose the use and abuse of law in its endless suppression and erosion of civil liberties in a pretense that such repressive laws are justify and expose the tuition fees as a ploy to fund war. And with this, like the dragons in the den who consider inventions and interventions, on this one, and for these reasons, I'm out.